I was saying happy almost spring break. We've almost made it. We have one more week to go and we'll be at that little break. I was telling, we have two of our tutors with us today, Jessica and Alicia, and I was telling them, although this semester has gone by quickly, our spring break is a little early this year. And so I feel like April and May might feel long, but who knows, maybe not. Nice to see you all. I think many of you are returning folks, but I do see a couple folks I haven't seen before. So I just want to introduce myself. My name is Andrea Hammock. I'm the Writing Center Coordinator for the San Jacinto campus, and I am the one who always does the Wednesday morning workshops at 9. So my colleague Carol Coffin, she's the one that does the Thursday ones. So it's great to see you all. We're going to use sort of a combination of, if you have any questions, you can drop them in chat, or you can raise your hand and speak up if you'd like. We have two of our wonderful tutors with us here today. We have Alicia and Jessica. They are both tutors in the Writing Center, and they can help you with also reading, because I know some of you are here today because of talking about, how to become like better readers and how to make sure that we can tackle all those hard readings that are getting thrown our way. And so they can both help with that as well. And they are also going to be monitoring the chat and helping us out with that today. So Jessica, if you'd like to wave and introduce yourself. And
hi, good morning, everyone. You can find me online in PALS on Mondays from 3 to 5 p.m., on Thursdays in the LRC from 2 to 6 p.m. And then now I'm in person at the Temecula campus on Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And I'll put it in the chat too.
That's great. Thank you, Jessica. And then Alicia.
Hello, good morning. My name is Alicia. I'm an online writing tutor, and I'm all online, so you can go ahead and find me on Mondays, 1 p.m. through 5 p.m., Tuesdays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., and Wednesdays, 8:45 a.m. to 10 a.m. And then, yeah, I'll post it in the chat as well.
Great, thank you. And so, as we get started this morning, I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to acknowledge that, admitting that we have difficulties with reading is kind of a tough thing for people. And I don't understand really why that is, because we're fine with admitting other things, right? And so one of the things that I hear a lot from students is, I'm just not any good at math, right? I'm not a math person. I'm not good at math. And like students don't have any problem saying that, right? My mom has tried to teach me how to crochet since I was 10 years old, and something is wrong with me. I cannot do it. I cannot crochet. Doesn't matter how hard I try. I've tried to like take classes. I've tried to do like a million different things. And of course somebody's gonna ring the doorbell right now. So I've tried to do, it a million times, and I cannot do it. But for some reason, it's really difficult for us to say, this reading is too hard for me. I'm having a hard time with it. And I think that's unfortunate, because when you think about it, there's always going to be something that's too hard for us, right? If you're not reading something that's too hard for you, then you haven't, expanded your boundaries yet, because there's always going to be stuff that's in a subject that we're not very good at. And because of that, it makes reading very difficult, right? So if I pick up something that is a chemistry reading, right? It's something that maybe a study that's been done in chemistry, I'm not going to have a good time following that, right? I'm not a chemist. I took a chemistry class, but it was way back in high school. I don't really remember it. And so I'm going to struggle with that, right? It's going to be a tough read for me. It's going to be a slow read. I'm probably going to have to stop and look a lot of things up. When, I always tell students that if you haven't found something that's too hard to read for you yet, if you can just plow through everything with no problems whatsoever, then it's time for you to learn another language, right? Because then you can definitely get yourself into a place where you have a struggle reading, right? And so, I've been trying, I took 4 years of Spanish in high school, and I've been trying to refresh my memory in Spanish as much as possible lately. And so I've been trying to read not tough books, but I've been trying to read some simple books in Spanish just to get myself back into the rhythm of it. It's tough, right? I mean, it's a language that I'm not used to using every day. And so a lot of times I'm like, oh, I think this is what this says, but I'm not sure. So I have to use context clues, right? I have to try to figure it out. Like, okay, I understand this sentence and this sentence, but not quite this one. So, let me see if I can figure out still what the story is. And so when we think about, being able to ask, I think a lot of it is because we associate intelligence with reading ability in for some reason in this country, even though there's no real relation between that whatsoever. Many people who struggle with reading and who admittedly struggle with reading and who have disabilities that make it hard for them to read actually have just as high, if not higher, intelligence than everybody else, right? And so there's no relationship between intelligence and reading level whatsoever. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. We also have a lot of things that when we were kids, maybe kind of made us either like or not like reading, maybe made us feel bad about our reading level. And so one of the things that a lot of times they did to us in school is they would make us read out loud in front of the class, right? We would go around and everybody would have to read for a few minutes. Does anybody remember that? Like you had to do that and did anybody like it? I feel like nobody liked that, right? Everybody hated it. And I know I'm sure I'm not the only one. I used to count like, okay, they're on paragraph 7 and I'm the 11th person in the class. So I wasn't even listening to what was reading. I was just looking like, okay, I'm reader number 11. Let me see if I can pronounce everything in my paragraph. And then why would it matter if I couldn't? Like, what was I going to do about it at that point, right? Get sick, run out of the classroom. So we definitely had those kinds of experiences that oftentimes made us think we weren't good readers. I will tell you, I'm also a reading specialist. I went to Cal State Fullerton and got some specialized certification in literacy and reading. And being able to read out loud, and especially being able to read out loud in front of an audience, has absolutely nothing to do with your reading level. That's a totally different skill, just so you know. So when they were having us do that, we were practicing, I guess, like getting over our nerves of speaking in front of people. And we were practicing, enunciation and speaking aloud. That had nothing to do with our literacy skills, though. They're completely, totally unrelated things. And that's why probably when you were reading things like that in the classroom, you had a hard time following along and actually following the story or the subject that you were studying, because you weren't really reading, right? Even when you were sitting there reading aloud to the class, I'll bet you weren't processing what you were reading. You were just thinking like, I hope nobody starts laughing at how I said that word, right? And before and after, you weren't really reading. You were just either, listening to somebody else's mistakes and trying not to laugh at them, or you were worried that your turn was coming, right? And so we've had experiences like that have oftentimes made us feel bad about our reading or made us think that we're not good readers. And I just want us today to like throw that all out the window, right? Because none of that was true. With our ability to read had absolutely nothing to do with that. Another thing that sometimes they would mess us up in reading, what they would do is they would tell you like, you need to not let your mind wander while you're reading. You need to focus on your reading, right? Don't let your mind wander. Don't start thinking about other things. Focus on what it is that you're reading. And we, from the time we were in kindergarten, we were told that by adults, right? Maybe it wasn't parents, but it might've been teachers. Studies have shown that that's actually not a good process at all. And so we have this wonderful thing called metacognition. I'm going to put that in the chat. And what metacognition is a lot of times people describe it as thinking about our thinking. But the way that metacognition plays a role in our reading is that actually when we're reading something, we should have like this, our brain should be highlighted everywhere to where we're making all kinds of connections to things that have happened in our life, to thoughts that we've had, to maybe things that we're learning in another class, memories of our grandma, like all kinds of strange things should be popping into our head while we're reading. And that's what makes reading so much better than watching TV. When you're watching a film, right, everything is kind of laid out there for you. You don't have to do a whole lot of thinking. What the characters look like, what the setting looks like, what the weather's like, all of that is right there on the screen. And so the only thing you have to do is kind of just passively sit there and follow along with the story. When we're reading, we create everything, right? And so the best example I can give you of that is when I was, several years ago, I was teaching a children's literature class, and my students were telling me about like an adolescent book that was really popular at the time. And many of you have probably at least heard of it, if not read it, Twilight, right? And so I immediately okay, I'm going to read the Twilight series, right? It's about these like teenage vampires. And so I read the Twilight series. And Edward, the main vampire, is supposed to be like a good looking young man, right? He's supposed to be like very attractive. And so in my mind, I had my version of Edward, like what Edward looked like. I then watched the movie and I was like, oh no, that's not my Edward. That's somebody else's Edward, right? That's not what my Edward looks like at all. And so, and he now is Batman, right? And so what I think is important to take away from that is that a lot of times, you've probably noticed if you read a book first and then you watch the movie, you can't ever quite like the movie as much. And that's because that's somebody else's vision of what that book looked like. It's not your vision. You created your own vision, and then somebody else came and hijacked it, right? And they made the characters look like something else. They made the places look like something else. So you never quite like the movie as well as you did the book. The opposite is true too. So when I was a child and I was growing up, this is a long time ago. And so we only got 13 channels, if you can imagine, didn't have a remote control, had to get up and go turn the knob on the TV. It was practically like dinosaur days. But every year they would always play The Wizard of Oz. And it was a big event in my house, right? My mom loved The Wizard of Oz. So we'd like pop popcorn and like make homemade pizza. And it was like, oh, it's only 3 more weeks till The Wizard of Oz is on. It was a big event in my house. So every year when I was growing up, I watched The Wizard of Oz. So I decided when I was an adult, I should read the book. I didn't even know there was a book when I was little. So I decided I'm going to read the book. And it really messed with me because first of all, the book doesn't follow the movie at all. It's like completely different. The characters are not even remotely the same. But then I couldn't make my characters look like anything except for the characters that were in the movie because I had seen that movie so much, it was already implanted in my brain, right? I could not remove the two things from one another. So when we think of metacognition, a lot of times we'll even just have a word and it will automatically set us off and get us thinking about a trillion other things. And that's actually a good thing, right? I want you to be okay with that. When we're reading, we should be connecting it, thinking about other things, asking questions. That's good reading. What that does is that helps us prevent from getting to the bottom of the page and saying, what did I just read? That ever happened to anybody? I hope it's not just me, right? You're reading, your eyeballs are moving and you're going along, you read every word, but you get to the bottom of that page and you're like, I have no idea what I should read. I was reading, but I wasn't reading, right? I wasn't really reading. And when you do that, that's a real waste of time, right? That's like the biggest drag ever when I find myself doing that, because now I've either got to be okay with the fact that I didn't just read that page and move on and hope that I'm not tested on it or I don't have to write a paper on it or whatever. Or what I usually have to do is I have to go back and read it again. I'm a busy person. I'm sure you all are busy people too. I don't have time to be reading things 3 or 4 times, right? I need to be able to read it once and get it. So metacognition is how we help ourselves get there. And I'll give you an example of how metacognition kind of works, because I think I have a really easy way for you to understand. What happens is our brain really just cares about a few things, right? Our brain wants to make sure our heart keeps pumping. Our brain wants to make sure that we're not in pain, so it keeps our nerves active. Our brain wants our lungs to keep working. Our brain is always on the lookout for like infections that are coming into our body, so it can know, to put itself into action to fight that. And so our brain, I hate to say it, it really doesn't care that much about reading, right? It's our hearts and souls that care about reading, but our brain is like, that's not really important to me. So we have to set our brains up to allow ourselves to be able to connect with reading and make the reading important. A lot of things that we do, our minds will actually tune out. So, I mean, if I just took 10 seconds right now and had you think about like what's happening in the room around you that you're currently tuning out, right? Can you hear a clock ticking? The wind outside, that's what I'm hearing. Maybe your dog is snoring or your cat's licking their leg, right? Like there's all these things that we're blocking out, things that are not necessarily important to our day-to-day moment. An example of that I can give you is, have you ever driven somewhere, especially somewhere that you go to quite a bit, and you get to that place and you think, how did I get here? You drove there, right? You drove, you made it, but you don't remember any of it. Like you were just in pilot mode, right? You were not thinking. And so you're like, I hope I stopped at that red light. I don't think I ran anybody over, but I don't know how I got here because I was just in autopilot. Nothing was, like registering with me. On the flip side of that, when we want to be metacognitive, right? When we really want to focus, we might find ourselves where we're driving down the road looking for a certain address, and we have to turn our radio down to find that address, because that's us telling ourselves like, I can't listen to the radio because I'm looking for an address. When you really think about that, that doesn't make any sense, does it? Like, why can't you listen to a radio and look at an address? But you'll turn your music off because you're like, oh, I gotta find this address. Let me turn this radio down, because you're telling yourself, I have to focus. Right? You're being metacognitive in that moment. You're talking to your brain. Brain, this is important. Brain, we need to look for this address. Brain, you can't be singing along to Justin Bieber right now, right? You got to turn that down. So we have to do the same thing when we get ready to read something, and especially if it's something that we don't want to read, right? So if you're taking a class right now, don't tell me who, but if you're taking a class right now and you have to read, let's say, the textbook, and you're like, oh man, this is the boringest textbook. I don't want to read this. I know we have a test on it, but it's going to be boring. Oh my gosh, it's 46 pages. Are you kidding me? Guess what? Your brain's like, okay, cool. When I sit down to read this, I'm not going to pay attention because I just heard her say, this isn't important. This doesn't matter. I don't want to do this. So we won't do it. And that's where you get yourself into a situation where you get to the bottom of the page. You don't pay any attention to what you just read. Right. So with this metacognition, you actually want to do something completely different with yourself. You want to make sure that you have set yourself up for success before you even start reading. And so I have a couple of different methods that are going to get you into that metacognitive mindset. But before we even look at these methods really quickly, what I want you to keep in mind is you have to set your brain up to where it's important. And I talk to my brain. I know that probably makes me sound crazy, but I talk to my brain. I will tell myself, okay, I got to read this chemistry textbook. It's really important to me because I want to get a good grade on the test, because I want to apply for that scholarship. And I know that I need to get an A or a B in all of my classes in order to even, hopefully qualify. And if I don't get that scholarship, then I'm going to have to take on more work. And if I take on more work, I know I'm going to suffer in the future when I take my classes. So this is really important. I need to focus on this. I want to make sure that I do well. So I'm going to read this, and I'm going to read it well, and I'm going to read it carefully. And believe it or not, that actually works, right? You have to get yourself in a mindset to where it's like, okay, this is important. I'm going to pay attention. Then what you want to do is actually, while you're reading it, make some connections with it. And so what I do is I give myself jobs, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. I like to use, and I use this, even though I teach English, right? I want to make sure that when I'm reading, I'm not wasting my time. And so I love these things called evidence charts. If you haven't seen one, you're probably going to think it's weird at first. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, perfect. So what happens is, depending on how long my chapter or my article or my book is, I will give myself a task. And what I will do with this task, and this one is set up in particular for articles, but you could also, set them up for textbook chapters, whatever you want to do. I happen to be working on a very long paper right now for school. I'm also, even though I teach for the college, I'm a student, and I'm working on a long paper. So I'm reading a lot of articles. And I wanted to show you, this is what I use. This is how I make myself pay attention to not always the most interesting things. I will give myself a job that for every article, I have to find 15 pieces of evidence, something that I found important, that I connected to. And so what I do is I will, put the name. I want to put my name and the date that I've read it, so that I can always remember that. What was the kind of like short title of the article, and how many pages was it, or what pages did I read? Because sometimes I just pick parts of it to read. And then what I do with this evidence is I put in like either a paraphrase or a summary of what I read, or an important quote. And I always put the page number there every single time. And then what I'll do is, either in the moment, if I feel like it's something I need to get to right then, I will put, why did I think that was important? What do I think about it? What do I wonder about it? What's a question that I have? What's a connection that maybe it made me think of to another class or something else that I've read, a different article? I'll assign myself to do at least like 15 of these, right? Not 15 pages, but 15 little chunks of evidence. This gives me a job. And so what this does is, I will never get to the bottom of the page and say, what did I just read? Because all of a sudden now I have a task, right? I have something that I'm doing. I have a job. I have an assignment. This is why when you were younger, your teachers used to give you those little things like questions at the back of the book to answer, right? Because they wanted you to pay attention while you were reading. This is you assigning it to yourself. So it should have even more meaning to it. You want to be thinking while you read. You want to be making connections while you read. I'm going to put this in the chat, and I'll send it to you when you get the email from me with the confirmation that you attended today and the recording and all that. But what these evidence charts, they can be something as simple as folding a piece of paper in half. I love these, in addition to the fact that they keep me from ever reading an article or a chapter without getting to the bottom of the page and saying, what did I read? I love them also for class discussion. When I was a student, especially early on, I was really, really shy. And I think I had good things to say in class, but I was too nervous to raise my hand and say them, because what would happen is I would raise my hand, the instructor would call on me, and then I would have, like, I guess you would call it a brain fart, right? And I would think like, I have no idea what I was going to say right now. And then I would stumble through my words. What's fantastic about this is, if you can imagine, an instructor assigns you an article to read for your class, right? We're going to say maybe it's a history class. And so your instructor assigns you an article to read. You've read it using this method, this evidence chart method, and you've logged 15 things in this article that were evidence, and you put the page number, things that stood out to you as being important, right? Maybe a quote, a paraphrase, you've got the page number, and then you've got your interpretation of it. Why did you write that down? It made you think of this. It made you want to question this. You raise your hand, instructor calls on you. Yes, Andrea. What do you what's your question? Imagine how smart I sound. I've got this in front of me. Well, as I was reading the article, Professor so-and-so, there was a quote on page 76 that said, blah, 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 blah. And that made me wonder, blah, 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 blah. And so I have a question, blah, 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 blah. See how it set me up to discuss this article well, right? I don't have to like fumble back through my article to find the important stuff. Also, because I have written it here, right? I do this personally. I do it by handwriting. Like I carry the piece of paper with me and I'm reading the article and I've got a pen and paper. Some people do it by typing. It works, whatever works best for you. I feel like I retain stuff more when I handwrite. So what's great about this is when you get ready to write a paper, right? Let's say that your instructor like, okay, now you're gonna write a paper about this article, right? Or about the 3 articles that we've read. You already have some fantastic notes. You're going to save yourself a whole lot of time when it comes time to actually write that paper, because you already did the note-taking process that nobody else in your class probably did. You know exactly what page numbers, the important stuff that stood out to you are. You know what questions, what thoughts, what ideas, what connections you already had to this piece. You're ready to write the paper, right? And if you do type it, you may even have chunks of this evidence that you could literally just copy and paste and plop into your paper and maybe, just edit it a little bit. I don't do that. I do handwrite mine, so I'm not able to do that, but I definitely pull from my evidence charts whenever I write. And so this, like I said, it gives me a task, it gives me something to do, and it makes me get into that metacognitive place. Unlike my 2nd grade teacher, right, who used to tell me, you need to stop letting your mind wander while you read, Andrea. She was wrong. You do kind of want to let your mind wander. I'm not saying you want to be thinking about like, apple pie or something, but you want to let your mind wander as long as it's in the realm of the topic that you're reading about. That's good mind wander, right? I wish that they had taught us how to let our minds wander correctly instead of just saying, don't let your mind wander. And so this is a method that I like to use. Let me stop my share here for just a moment. I'm going to show you kind of another, if I don't do an evidence chart, then what I do is this other little thing, which is I found a really great chart that I'm going to steal from the University of Texas. And I love, this kind of covers exactly what I do. This is the SQ4R method. I'm going to send this to you as well. And so don't worry about writing everything down. But basically what this does is it's SQ, and then there's 4 R's that are here. And so I just want you to really look at the bottom half here. You're going to start off with a reading, and this really works well in textbook reading. I don't think it works as well in novels or articles, but if you're looking at a textbook, you're going to survey the textbook chapter first. And so this is just getting your mind into a place where, okay, this is important information. I'm going to pay attention to this. And so you're looking at like, what is the outline? What are the chapter headings? What are the charts? What are the pictures they have? Just look through the chapter first. It's kind of like if you get your textbook on the first day of school and you thumb through it, right? But you're doing that just at the chapter level to set yourself up for reading well. And then you're going to think about what questions, that's the Q in the SQ4R. What questions do I think I'm going to have about this reading? What that does is the same thing those evidence charts just did for you. They give you a task. They give you something to do so that when you're reading, you're not letting your mind wander. You're actually, digging in and saying, okay, these are the questions that I have. And then you're going to read it. And then you're going to recite what you learned. And I recite by writing it down. Some people just say it. Okay, I just finished this chapter. This is what I learned. Da, 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 da. I'm going to say everything that I learned. What are the important points? And then you're going to go back and review it sometime, right? Sometime, it might be later that day. It might be a week later. It might be a month later, depending on, some people have finals that cover their whole 18 weeks of the semester. So it might be 17 weeks later. Go back and review. And then you'll notice they kind of have this last R, which is to relate. And that means start making connections between what you've read and other things you've read, right? That's the right-hand column of that evidence chart that I showed you, is to start to do the metacognitive stuff, to make those connections, right? Now, I just want to say, I know we're kind of out of time here. I did want to tell you that sometimes metacognitive stuff can be messy. Your brain may start telling you things like, wonder what's happening on Instagram right now, right? Ooh, something, look, something's going on outside, right? It may even start like, you're kind of hungry. A lot of times that is just your brain trying to get out of work. I'll be honest with you, right? That's what it is. And so you have to either do two things. If you're really hungry, okay, go get something to eat, then come back and go to work. If you're just trying to get yourself to not work by going to Instagram or whatever, what I will do is sometimes set a timer. I have one of those little Alexa. I don't want to say it because she'll start buzzing on me, but I have one of those, and I'll tell her, like, set a timer for 45 minutes. And I'll just tell myself, okay, I'm going to read for 45 minutes and then I can get on Facebook and I can see what's going on in the world, right? And so I make myself like, this is my time frame. You have to work for this time. And then once that's over, then you can reward yourself with a little break. And so hopefully that's helpful to you. When you get an email from me today, you will, hopefully it'll come today. Whenever Zoom sends me the recording, I'll send you all an email. It will be confirmation that you attended today. I'll make sure you have the information for the SQ4R and also the evidence charts that you can, you're welcome to use. You can print them out. They're just little things that I created that I found helpful. And many schools are using them. I kind of modified them to make them work better. And I like to add the page number because I want to be able to quickly go back to where I had that thought if I need to. Most of them that you'll find online do not say to put the page number, but I think that's one of the most important parts. So does anybody have any questions for me? I'll stop my share here and you'll get all this. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me. I hope if you have any reading questions, you can always reach out to me. I'm going to put my email here in the chat. But if you have any questions on writing or anything, feel free to let me know. And I look forward to seeing you all after spring break. Okay, everybody take care. And like I said, you'll get the recording later today. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.